Memorable event for us today, and thank you all for coming. The weather hasn't been really very good today, but it's good to see everyone in spite of the rain to come to our library for the book launch. I'd like to start off with the welcome to country, as we normally do, and I would like to pay my respect to elders past and present, and to acknowledge the country that we are on, Tredinnick people, and I would like to say that I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present, and this is Canterbury Bankstown acknowledges traditional custodians who are the Tredinnick and Eora people of this area. So I'd like to, I'm very fortunate that to see everyone here today, and to introduce Mark Tredinnick, who's an essayist and poet author, and he has been very kind to come today and help us to launch this book. And he has been very helpful with in assisting Trish in her endeavor to write this book, The Japanese Wife, which makes for very interesting reading. So without much ado, I'd like to introduce Mark. Thank you very much.
I think I might stand.
Yes.
Hello. So good to be here together, isn't it? Well, you never know how things are going to work out, do you? You know how they're going to work out. So, what was it, Trish? 2007 or 8 that we met?
About then.
It was about then. No, I remember because about that time I'd moved with my then quite young family down out of Sydney, Annandale, at the time down to Bowral, and I'm a writer. I was writing then, and part of the reason why we bought down there was the Sydney real estate prices. This remains a problem. But in fact, just Australian real estate prices. But we could afford a place, but also it was a little country cottage with a quite decent cowshed out the back. Cowsheds are very good places to write in, and indeed to teach classes in. So we had just got a thing called the cowshed classes going, and that Trish was in either the first or the second batch.
I must have been the second.
Second batch.
I think I'd been down there a bit before with my daughter, and we stayed somewhere near the coast. But I went to Berkeley Books at, where are they?
Very,
yes.
Everywhere.
And I bought the Little Red Writing Book.
Ah.
And in the back of that book it said about the cowshed classes. So
Well, there you are. Trish, you're going to get your turn. Okay. But I'd forgotten that bit. Thank you for mentioning the Little Red Writing Book. So I am a poet chiefly. Like if they're putting one thing on the gravestone, poet will do the trick, I think. Because poetry is literature, actually. Poetry is what everyone wrote before we discovered all these newfangled forms like YA and novels and things like that. Poetry is literature, actually. And it's got some particular disciplines of grace attached to the writing of it, which have to do with ancient understandings about the musicality of speech and the magic of form and whatnot. And Trish has been seduced by me somewhat in that direction too, I'm pleased to be able to tell you. But before all of that, I was a book publisher actually, and before that I spent most of my youth in libraries, so it's a delight to be back in one. Again, somewhere in an interview I said once, I lived most of my life in sentences, most of them other people's. This is why we write, so that other people can live their lives in our sentences and get to rattle around in them and feel what it's like to have inhabited the one chance we get at being on the earth for a little while, which is what this is, I think, and to attain a voice and get some life's experience and get some speaking done. And although we would all love for our books to sell millions of copies, and we all want to have readers now. The truth is we write for history, I think. The truth is we write to get it said, to bear some truthful witness to one unique thing, the life that we've lived, in the case of memoir in particular, and I think that's what Trish has done here. And you know, if 1 million people read the book, that's fantastic for the royalties and whatnot. But the very fact that the book has been written is the achievement. That is the achievement. It costs a lot of effort. As Joan Didion, a wonderful writer, beloved of Trish actually too, and mentioned in the book, Joan Didion once said, if you want to write memoir, be prepared to lose some friends. And I can see that you've not read the book yet because you're all here. But as I say in my little Red Writing book, which is where I was going for that, I think I have 3 books about the writing craft, and Trish stumbled upon the central one of them, which is the Little Red Writing book. And in that book somewhere I say, never write to please your mother. Sorry to all the mothers, but you know what I mean. To find one's own true voice is what you must seek to do on the paper, no matter what you're writing about, actually. I think the achievement is authenticity, it's integrity, and writing well is a spiritual accomplishment, actually. It means that you've set aside some expectations of others and inhabited the only life that you get to live, the only way that you know how to live it. So it's a joy to be here with Trish after all those years, and to be able to hold that in my hands. Beautiful book, too, beautiful inside. I know it inside, but it is actually a lovely object, I think, which is a treasure. Many of us who love language and the whole life of the mind, who love books, appreciate, I think, you know, what it means to make a book with good flop. We call that flop. And in the publishing trade, I spent 10 years in book publishing, losing my way into writing through book publishing in the first place. And you learn a lot of things you didn't realize you didn't know about the wise crafts of composition and text design and typography and stock and, you know, glue and fabrication of books and all that kind of stuff. So that's a wonderful achievement too. But most of the achievements inside the covers. And I think when Trish first turned up, she had some crazy idea about writing fiction. But I soon talked her out of that, because like, we have enough novels. What we want is some lyric writing. Actually, I'm very addicted to fact. I actually write, as I confess to my students, poetry and lyric non-fiction, because I'm the world's worst liar, essentially. I can't make it up. I just can't. And actually, it was a joy at a certain age to discover that to be a writer isn't chiefly about imagination in the sense of invention. To be a writer is to invent sentences, phrases. Like Shakespeare never invented a thing, except all the sentences, which are incredible, but the content was a given thing. He didn't really fashion arcs of story or anything like all of that stuff. He wrote. When you listen to Shakespeare, we'll get back to you in a moment here, Trish. When you listen to Shakespeare, when you see it performed especially, I was watching one recently and I thought, this has all been said before, hasn't it? But not this way, that's the point. And when language is turned in just a particular way, some personal truthfulness is divined and put onto the page. The way that each of us is the same thing. We're all humans. And each of us is a manifestation of the human condition, so we're the same. But each of us manifests it uniquely, so we're unique. And so when a writer gets it said right and truthfully, that seems to be about being truthful to things that transcend the self, as well as to some things that are uniquely in the self. And I think that's what Trish has done here. This is a hell of a life you've had, Trish. Actually, Jodie, my partner, hi Jodie, we are filming it. Jodie said to me just yesterday, I think Trish has lived an incredible life. Actually, Up to a point we all do, but Trish's is remarkable in her particular ways, and they're captured in the book, in the dance. I think my notes here said something about a dance that this book performs, which is, I think, a dance Trish learned from her parents and others around her, between steadfastness and adaptability. Steadfastness and adaptability. Making things nice, but not making everything nice. Being, what's the right word for it? Knowing how to belong with people and to conform with cultural habits that are worth conforming with, but not with those that aren't. Like refusing cant and cliche, and finding her way out of, for goodness sakes, in these northern beaches, to the world, and wanting from an early age to live a life that included another culture, other cultures, and other languages. That's quite courageous, really, particularly from this land mass at that particular time, when we'd forgotten that there had been 500 other languages spoken here since the beginning of times. And I grew up in Epping, not all that far from here, and I couldn't have told you until recently who the first peoples were, whose land we were on. It's a terrible travesty, but it's what afflicts all of us, and it's made many of us, both black and white, kind of orphans to land. Like, it's very hard to find a deep sense of belonging somewhere if we didn't grow up with a kind of child-parent relationship with country, and hardly any of us have had a chance to do that in a deep way. But Trish found her way from a lovely, beautiful part of the world, but a fairly monocultural one, to the other side of the world, and she thought she was going to meet a German man. In fact, she met a Japanese man and another culture, as well as German, that she didn't perhaps anticipate. And the rest of the story from there, you would know if you know Trish, and it's a fair bit of it's in the book, but perhaps the most important and adventurous work that any of us do is to have children, if that is our gift, and to keep them alive and to stop them from killing us and us from killing them from time to time. Trish has lived in lots of different places. She loves horses. That reflects very well on her, very, very well on her. In fact, Linda and I were just saying that, the word girt by sea, which Linda was reminding the English, who forget their English, don't they, Linda? That girt is in fact a real word, and of course it's the same word as girth, around a horse. It's a thing you'd know if you've done some riding on horses and falling off horses, in my case too, just recently. So I think this is a marvelous book, and in it you find Trish, you find a number of the incidents of her life, and I think a lot of our work together was to study and practice the disciplines of grace, I suppose is how I look at them, Trish. The endeavor of a mentor teacher should never be to get anybody to talk in any other way than their own. But we don't know what our own is the thing. And we find it through refusing cliche and hackneyed commonplace expressions. That's how writers work out how to write and sound unique. Hemingway is the great bullying spokesperson of that principle. He said, I refuse to write anything the way I've heard it said before. Because what happens when that's your discipline is that you fall completely silent, or you write a lot of rubbish, or you get up again and you choose to write every phrase and sentence the way that only you say it, the way that you go in yourself. So that's a discipline, that radical originality, I suppose, that gives the world voice and gives the writer back to herself, in Trish's case. So you meet Trish through the way she phrases everything. Many of the experiences that she describes in her own life, we were working, as I often work with my students in poetry and other forms, and indeed, this is my own struggle, to try to find the myth inside the moment, like the way in which what happened to me is a human experience that someone else might inhabit, not just the way in which it advertises my particularity, which is a bit of an addiction of the current moment in my view. But Trish always had the right cast of mind from her parents and everything that she learned and was in the world. But it does take a bit of practice, that stuff, doesn't it, Trish, too? Because Trish's writing voice is like, if I may, her being and her speaking voice, which is to operate very close to the common tongue, as Tolkien calls it, very, very close on the page, to nothing pompous. She writes the way she talks, and she talks like a real person who's not putting on any airs and pomposities, and I admire that a great deal. I admire it in all of the great literature of the world, from Chaucer and Beowulf to the present company, Trish. And that takes some learning. Too, I think, to learn to have the courage to get some quite enormous small moments said very clearly, as if they might possibly be habitable by somebody who hasn't lived them. That takes a lot of attention, clarity, and a great deal of spiritual intelligence, I think, to imagine that which is human inside my own life. And you get this lovely complexity in the book through what it tells and how it tells it. And one of the other dances, I think I have written down here on my list, Trish, which you can perform for us if you like, or we can perform, is the dance between levity and gravity. Levity and gravity. Trish is both funny and serious at the same time. That's the trick of literature. Don't tell your students for free, because that's a central piece of advice, that one. Actually, Shakespeare, like think of any of the great writers, Jane Austen. Emily Dickinson, not super funny, it's got to be said, but wonderful. Levity doesn't always mean fall about the ground laughing. It just means the intelligence it takes to see the absurdity of the human condition at the same time as perceiving the tragedy of the human condition. I think, one of your great gifts, Trish, is that you've got that. I think that's the way you see the world. And you've learned to allow yourself to get that down on paper through a telling of your story. So, thanks for coming along today, all of you, young and old. It's great to see you. I want to congratulate you, Trish. It's a fantastic achievement. There's more coming, by the way. There's a lot more coming. Not today, but other days. There are more books, including some wonderful poems. So congratulations to you and to your publisher, but you especially. And I would like to declare the book launched.
I grew. I feel like this.
You just make it up.
Okay.
Not me.
I have to say, Mark has been wonderful, a wonderful help to me, always very encouraging, and yet he was also quite firm about certain things that he said needed to be said, that I was saying, I don't think I can probably publish this bit.
Of course you can.
But I did. And I was thinking myself too, well, it is a memoir, it's which is just my memory of things. I never kept the journal. I don't write a journal every day, and I never kept a journal when I was travelling, and I never kept a journal clearly when I was young and newly married and having 4 children and doing things like that. There was no time, but so it's written from memory, but the events did happen, and I guess it would be coloured by my perception of what was happening at the time that it happened, which was, it goes over a long period of time, and like I said, I've been being helped by Mark for a long time. Must be getting close to 20 years now.
Well, yeah, it's this, it's 16, I think.
And it's interesting that Mark mentioned what's his name? No, the other one. The old man in the sea.
Hemingway.
Hemingway. She mentioned Hemingway. Because, and my father, the same thing.
Yeah.
Dad loved Hemingway.
Yeah.
He loved the way he
Yeah.
wrote. I think because Dad loved the sea, and I can't remember whether we had to study The Old Man and the Sea at school or sometime or not, but I know Dad made me read it when I was about in year 7 or 8, and I found it incredibly boring. But I did
Novels, I tell you.
I did admire Hemingway after that, and the way he just tells things as they are, and it's straight. And I don't know whether he ever actually said this, but I've associated it with Hemingway, the fact that however you say something, the simple is best. Don't use bigger words than you have to, don't use more than you have to, just get it said clearly. So I really thank you, Mark, for all your help. And I have one of my children is here today with a grandchild who's been very quiet and well behaved. Probably because he's got a plug in his mouth. So I don't know anything you want to say. I have been now, more recently since I finished the book, I've been writing quite a bit of poetry and being helped by that with Mark, and I'm really enjoying doing that now. So I thought that I would read you a little bit from the book, if you can bear to do that. And the first one that I'm going to write is actually. Oh, okay. It's actually chapter 23, but it happens to be when I first started going to Mark's cowshed classes, we had to write something every week. And I felt that everybody else in the group was just really experienced and really great, and one of them had things published, and I couldn't come up with anything that I thought was worth even allowing someone to read in that group. But I did, and for about 3 weeks, I think most of what I did was pretty much rubbish. It was fiction. And then we had a massacre at home. We had a lot of chickens, and I wrote about this, and then Mark said, yes, now you've got it. And so I'd like to read you that chapter, which, although it was one of the first chapters of this book that I actually wrote, it's chapter 23 now, because I do it sort of in chronological order. And this one's called Massacre at Pebbly Hill Road. And I have got a haiku. I don't know if you know what haiku is, a Japanese form of poetry, and it's generally 3 lines, and it's a specified number of syllables per line, which is 575. And if you know anything about the Japanese language, you'll realise why they have syllables, because they don't spell with an alphabet like we do. They do use Chinese characters, but they also have a phonetic alphabet, and that comes in syllables. And so it's that alphabet that the syllables are usually counted in. But we've translated that into an English way of doing it, and still syllables work. So the haiku at the beginning of this chapter says, bok, 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 bok. Conversation, chickens speak. Fox came, chicken's gone. And that's what the chapter's about. So it started off February 2009. I dislocated my right shoulder, and when I finally made it outside on a late summer morning that carried the promise of a hot day to come, I saw that the chicken store had been left open all night. I had 4 chickens: Dangleberry, the squatter, number 3 and number 4. Earlier risers than I, they were already gone for the day, out on important chicken business, no doubt. I didn't bother to look closely, knowing that the eggs would come later, so I thought no more about the matter and continued with my daily chores. My right arm and shoulder had to be kept immobilised, so everything I did was more difficult than usual and required lateral thinking and concentration. I kept kitchen scraps for the chickens, apple cores, tomato offcuts, bread and such, which I gave them at dusk when I'd shut them in for the night and collect their eggs. They'd seen me coming with the food and run to join me, chatting as we walked together to the coop. We really did enjoy a chat in chicken speak. The conversation went something like this. The squatter, bok, 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 bok. I would say, repeat what he said. She, bok, 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 bok. Numbers 3 and 4, bok, 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 bok. I would say, bok, 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 bok. The squatter, bok, 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 bok. Bok, 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 bok. And numbers 3 and 4 would also reply the same thing. I've yet to crack the code, but I know that these conversations were nothing deep or serious, simply a comfortable chat between mates at the end of the day. Dangleberry didn't say much, but the squatter and numbers 3 and 4 made up for her. There were many variations of the beats and combinations of sound. They liked it when I mimicked their responses, and if I introduced a variation, they always discussed it and sometimes imitated it. Dangleberry, the last, who was named my son Ray, who's sitting at the back. Dangleberry, the last member of my original flock, had always been bottom of the pecking order and had survived 4 fox attacks. For a while during the last year, she was the only member of my flock of 1. She had always been a bit of an outsider and was never included with numbers 3 and 4, who were inseparable. She got along better with the squatter, also an individual, who often wandered off alone. On this occasion, as I went out at dusk, only Dangleberry and the squatter were there to greet me. I called and called for numbers 3 and 4, but they didn't come. I wasn't particularly concerned, as this had happened before, so Dangleberry, the squatter and I carried out our usual dusk conversation as we walked to the coop. Then I felt that rush that happens when bad news is suspected. The first third of the coop, the area near the door, was scattered with feathers. Feathers from 1 chicken, not 2. I led Dangleberry and the squatter, still chatting, through to the furthest part of the coop and gave them their scraps and then filled their feed, for which they were duly grateful. I collected the eggs and shut the 2 chickens safely in. On closer inspection of the area around the coop, I discovered more feathers. In fact, there was a trail of them, which I set out to follow. It led down the side of the property towards the back, and there on the dressage arena were the last feathers, evidence of a final battle. I never could tell numbers 3 and 4 apart, so for the purposes of this tale, I will say that it was number 3 who lost her life on the dressage arena. I found no trace of her body and no further trail of feathers that might have led me to her partner. I hoped that number 4 had managed to escape the attacker and gone to ground until it was safe. I found her the next day, lying close to the house under the kitchen window, in full view of the now very interested, but also very frustrated, German short-haired pointer, who was locked in his yard. She didn't seem to have lost many feathers, though she had been wounded. She may have even died of fright. 48 hours later, Sakai buried number 4 in a shallow grave where she lay. There is no religious or cultural significance to the 48-hour time lapse between the discovery of number 4's body and the burial. Rather, it took Sakai that long to satisfy himself that he was not going to persuade one of our children to do the job, that I was not going to be able to do it single-handed with my left, and to find a small window of opportunity in his busy life to perform such a task. When he did it thoroughly. As he was digging the grave, I asked him if he could see the extent of number 4's injuries. He replied that he couldn't because there were too many maggots. He then disappeared into the house, and I continued taking clothes off the line left-handed. The next thing, the chicken was lying in the grave, and he was spraying her with rapid knockdown insect spray. Why? I asked. Too many maggots, he said. Well, we want the maggots, I said. They help the body to decompose. Do they? He asked while continuing to spray. The squatter and Angleberry appeared to recover from the ordeal without too many emotional scars, but the flow of eggs to our table was drastically cut. It was time now to purchase more birds and rebuild my flock. And I'll just read you another short bit, which is a contrast to that. And this is a prose poem which I wrote about Sakai's father after he had passed away. He and I were quite close because I'd spent quite a bit of time in Japan, and he encouraged me a lot. He helped me with Japanese language. Anyway, here it is. Oji-chan is what in Japanese children call their grandfather. You showed me Japan. You taught me with patience. You knew I would understand and love Japan as you did. The Japanese eat raw fish, you said, but not raw vegetables. That's funny, isn't it? You chuckled. Europeans eat raw vegetables, but not raw fish. I hadn't thought of it that way. Together we watched a series on NHK about the Japanese language, linguistics. That was 38 years ago, actually a bit longer now. I don't remember the words or structures that were presented, but I remember our shared animated discussions about the usage and evolution of the Japanese language. We also discussed politics. You were a left-wing idealist, a member of the Japanese Communist Party, a graduate of arts law from Tokyo University, who had sacrificed your career for political ideals. Politically, I was definitely left of centre too. You taught me about politics in Japan. Grace Kelly died. A while later you realised I hadn't heard. My language acquisition rule did not permit any communication in English. I'd only watched and listened to the news in Japanese. Horrified, you immediately ordered the Asahi newspaper for me in English so that I could keep up with the news. You showed me the beauty of Momiji at Kamikochi. Momiji is the autumn leaves, and Kamikochi is a park where people go to enjoy the autumn leaves. You skied with Sakai, with me and Ray because you loved us, and you loved the Japan Alps. You tried to teach me how to use traditional Japanese toys, kendama, koma, daruma otoshi, so I could help the children, but I could never quite get it. And you accepted all that as part of my Western background, and I accepted your guidance as loving non-criticism. You introduced me to shochu, which is a Japanese spirit made from rice. You worried about me when I stayed out late, even though I was 37 years old. That annoyed me. But the mountain of paper cranes, each no bigger than a housefly, piled on the table in front of you when I came home, transformed my annoyance into guilt. You were still up at 2 a.m. Every time I stayed at Kachidoki, we drank coffee mid-morning, and in the evening we drank sake together, as we shared a long, relaxed meal, until just before Oba-chan, which is Grandma, was due home, when we rushed to clear the table and wash up. I miss you, Oji-chan. So that's, I think, it.
Except there's a rule at book launches. You know what the rule is?
What is it?
You can't leave without buying a book. You need that book. So we'll be watching. Well done, Trish.
Thank you very much. Mark had distracted me, but I had intended to say at the beginning that this book took me 11 years to write. I was working full time when I started it, and then I stopped. But here it is.
Well done.
Yeah, well done.